Hello and welcome back to I See Our Wrong, and today we're going to be looking at Season 8 of Doctor Who. Season 8 of Doctor Who aired between the 2nd of January and the 19th of June 1971. It featured 5 serials across 25 episodes and marked a significant shift in the show's direction. While Jon Pertwee returned as the Doctor, and familiar unit characters such as Sergeant Benton and the Brigadier remained central to the format, this season is best remembered for 2 very important introductions, that is, Jo Grant, played by Katie Manning, and Roger Delgado as the Master. Behind the scenes, producer Barry Letts and script editor Terence Dicks were now firmly in control of the series' creative directions. Their aim was clear, to give the Doctor a new, reoccurring nemesis. Now that the Daleks were no longer in the show due to their creator pulling them for a spin-off, they wanted someone who could match the Doctor's intellect and challenge him in new ways. Inspired by the dynamic of Holmes and Moriarty, they created the Master, a character who would appear in every serial this season. His presence helped define the tone of Season 8 and made it one of the most interconnected years of classic Who. It is this season, I believe, that distills some of the most important lore and characteristics of Doctor Who to date, and probably going forward. Not only is it got important characters and units, but it also cements the Doctor's relationship with the Master, and that's what makes this season truly special. Terror of the Autons. The season opened with Terror of the Autons, which was a direct sequel to Spearhead from Space, which had introduced the Autons and the Nestene consciousness the year before. Written by Robert Holmes and directed by Barry Letts, this 4-part story introduced several key characters who would go on to both define the Pertwee era and Doctor Who as a whole. Jo Grant joins the Doctor as his new companion. She replaces Liz Shaw and is immediately thrown into the chaos of alien invasions and dangerous technology. Captain Mike Yates makes his debut, rounding out the core unit team that will continue for the next few seasons. At the centre of the story, however, is the Master, who arrives on Earth with a plan to bring back the Nestene consciousness and conquer the planet using plastic as his weapon. The serial is quite often described as a soft reset or reboot for the show, with a refreshed unit headquarters, a new assistant, and a more accessible tone. The Terror of the Autons set the template for what would become the classic unit story. There are several behind-the-scenes stories that reflect the slightly chaotic nature of the early 1970s television production. In one scene, a stunt involving a troll doll had to be scrapped after the performer fainted in the costume. Another moment where an Auton is hit by a car ended with the stuntman actually being injured, but he carried on and the shot was used in the final cut. The story draws inspiration from contemporary fears about mass-produced plastic, with Holmes weaving themes of environmental anxiety and consumerism. Plastic daffodils, telephone cords, and even inflatable chairs become deadly tools in the Master's plan, turning everyday, innocuous items into instruments of horror. Narratively wise, the story wastes no time. It's very tight and just keeps on going with the action throughout. The Master arrives, hypnotises a circus manager, and steals a Nestene energy unit. Jo's first day involves being brainwashed and nearly blowing up the Doctor's lab. From there, the Doctor and unit investigate strange occurrences at plastic factories, while the Master uses his hypnotic influence to take control and prepare for the Nestene invasion. The climax is very snappy and features a car chase, a quarry escape, and the Doctor dismantling the Master's plan just in time. The Master, however, slips away, setting the stage for his continued appearances throughout this season. For many viewers, this was the story that fully cemented the new tone of the show. Faster pace, more character-driven, and with a recurring villain who would become a defining part of the Doctor's life.
Simply to say goodbye, Doctor.
Well, Spearhead from Space was a particularly important serial to me, as well as to the show's history. I think The Terror of the Autons basically takes that same idea, but makes it better. I do think it is, well, some scenes from the original might be more iconic. For example, dummies supposedly breaking through the glass window. This particular series excels in the second go of it. And I think that almost entirely is down to the appearance of Roger Delgado as the Master. Straight out the back, he's absolutely fantastic. He just nails every single line. He drips with charisma and with insanity, and he's just so fun to watch. There is a scene early on where a Time Lord sort of appears. A little man in a little bowler hat and a little umbrella. And he sort of grows bigger and he gets bigger, and he comes and he warns the Doctor of the Master. That really encapsulates, I think, for me, what the other Time Lords think of the Doctor and the Master's relationship. They are unhinged. They are unhinged right from the get-go, and it is immensely funny to see how their relationship was so perfect out of the gate. The Doctor and the Master both love and hate each other so much, and it really, really shown, especially through this first serial. Highlights for me include the Master killing someone with the blow-up chair, because I used to have one that looked quite like that, and I remember watching this serial as a very, very young child, and I was like, no, I'm not having that anymore. I will just pack that away and not touch it. So this serial, I think, probably doesn't get enough credit for launching so much of what is important about Doctor Who, or what came through in Doctor Who in later seasons and later character arcs and everything. I think, although at times it perhaps is a little bit cringy, or a little bit, you can kind of laugh at it because it's a little bit silly at certain points, but I think that really encapsulates what a perfect Doctor Who story is. Doesn't necessarily take itself too seriously. It's fun, it's got a little bit of action, it's got a little bit of comedy, it's got a little bit of everything, and it's got actually good acting in it. Like I said before, Roger Delgado is a fantastic actor, and he just comes out of the gate absolutely swinging with this one. Yeah. So I would say that it's a fantastic series, and it really just nails it straight out the bat. Another pro, almost, or big thing I'd like to mention was Katie Manning as Jo Grant. And Jo Grant is so difficult because Liz was such an important companion in different ways. Like Zoe, she was very, very intellectual, she was very, very clever, but at the same time, she was very no-nonsense, she was get to the point. With Jo, you have someone completely different, someone that completely just is heart first, that loves everything, loves doing things, and it's a little bit ditzy, but is so full of heart and joy and love that it doesn't really matter. You completely fall in love with her almost immediately. And it's kind of like that. She's a bit of a Nepo baby, right? She only got the job because her dad was someone high up. But and the Doctor doesn't like her because he's depressed over Liz leaving. And he's like, nah, can't be bothered with this. And then she almost blows him up. And their relationship is one of the more deep relationships, I think, within the first kind of decade and a half of Doctor Who. This relationship between the Doctor and his companion is the first time I think that it got to be as deep as it was. I think the only one that could rival it was the second Doctor and Jamie. But I think in terms of actually textual, what they put on the screen, rather than just the actors themselves, but what the writing was doing, the relationship between the two is just so fascinating to watch grow and change and see what it becomes until you eventually get the end of Jo's run. So yeah, I particularly love this serial. I think it's a fun serial and really sets the tone for what season 8 is trying to do. The Mind of Evil. The second serial of season 9, The Mind of Evil, took a darker, more grounded turn. It was written by Don Houghton and directed by Timothy Combe. The 6-part story blends science fiction with a more political thriller nature, exploring ideas of mind control, criminal reform, and a Cold War-style international tension. At the centre of the plot is the Keller Machine, a device which is designed to remove evil impulses from criminals. The Doctor and Jo visit Stanmore Prison to observe it in action, only to witness disturbing side effects, prisoners collapsing into comas, deaths that appear to be caused by fear itself. The machine, it turns out, doesn't remove evil, but instead channels it, and it's far more dangerous than anyone expected. Running alongside this is the First World Peace Conference, where a unit is assigned to provide security. The story weaves together espionage, sabotage, and a nerve gas missile plot, introducing a far more kind of stuffed and complicated narrative structure that's really been expected from Doctor Who at the time. The Doctor finds himself switching between the prison crisis and the diplomatic crisis, all while the Master, who is revealed to be behind both of these situations, manipulates events from behind the scenes. This is also a rare example of UNIT being used as an investigative or security-like force in global affairs. Obviously we knew this was happening beforehand because it's with the United Nations, but this is the first time we actually get to see it. Captain Yates and Sergeant Benton each get more expanded roles, and we see the Doctor interacting with diplomats, including speaking fluent Hokkien, a Chinese dialect, a small but notable step in diversifying the series' world building. Behind the scenes, The Mind of Evil was a more challenging production. Real helicopters and other military vehicles and personnel were used in the action sequences, making it one of the more expensive serials of the season. In fact, it got so expensive that Barry Letts was reportedly unhappy with the spiralling budget, and director Timothy Combe was not asked back to work on the series again. Much of the story's original colour footage was lost, and for many years it was only available in black and white. Thanks to the recovery of digital recordings and modern restoration techniques, the serial was eventually colorised for home media, returning it closer to its original form. The serial also stands out for the time for its casting. Christopher Combe and Picton Lem, who was married to writer Don Houghton, appear as Chinese characters at a time when Asian roles on British televisions were often played by white actors in yellowface. Director Timothy Combe was strongly against the practice of yellowface, as we should be today, and insisted on authentic casting, making it a far more progressive move for the show. Unfortunately, the show would often take a step back from this. For example, in the late 70s, an actor in yellowface was used, serial featuring the Fourth Doctor and Leela. If you want to read more about yellowface, its deeply colonialist and racist practice, I will link some articles down below that do a good job of explaining how dangerous and damaging it was for communities during the time and today. There's also strange anecdotes with this production stories. The designer hired someone from Savile Row to help create the prison uniforms. However, he was arrested mid-production. The designer had to visit him in jail in order to collect the rest of his work. Narratively, the story starts out slow to build, but escalates very quickly. As the Doctor investigates the Keller machine, he falls victim to its attacks as well. For example, he hallucinates a Dalek and other creatures from his travels before, and only Joe's quick thinking manages to actually save him. Meanwhile, the Master takes control of the prison, manipulates the inmates into hijacking a nuclear missile, and once again confronts the Doctor in a high-stakes battle of the wits, almost. The Master is not powerful enough to control the Keller machine, ultimately, and it becomes too unstable to control. The Doctor realises that it can only be destroyed by a powerful explosion or a surge of electricity. In a final act, the missile, which intended by the Master to cause a global conflict, is instead used to destroy the machine and foils his plans again. The Master, somehow, who knows how this could have happened, escapes once more, but not by making a very dramatic and tension-filled phone call to taunt the Doctor. It's a quiet, more personal moment between them, and it really shows the other side of their dynamic, not just as enemies, but as something a little bit more. Friends, perhaps? Intellectual rivals with a strangely familiar bond.
Good evening, Miss Grant. What a great pleasure it is to see you again.
Master, what are you doing here?
The doctor will tell you about it when he's recovered.
What have you been doing to him?
Nothing, just a little persuasion. Do try and make him see sense, my dear, for your sake.
So, well, this one isn't the weakest of this season. I think it suffers a lot from pacing. The first 3 episodes are very slow, and while it does a good job of building up the world around it, for example, the peace conference, the ability for the Doctor to speak different languages, to communicate with anybody he comes across, and to set up the prison and the side plots, I think it somehow does this job that is very, very stuffed full of storylines. Like I said, there's like 3 storylines kind of going on all at once. You have the Brigadier, his lot, working on the peace conference, the Doctor and Jo in the prison, and you've got Captain Yates with the missile. All these things should make it easier for the pacing to be a little bit more secure, a little bit more strong, keeping going, but unfortunately for some reason the first 3 episodes I do find drag a little bit. And then once the kind of storylines come together almost, it really like picks up and it keeps going, and it makes it a lot faster paced and a lot more exciting to watch. There's a couple of good scenes in this serial, good relationship building, I think. It shows more of Jo's character. So there's a bit where Jo is left alone at the prison so that the Doctor can go and investigate the World Peace Conference. And as a result, she ends up looking after this prisoner who has clearly done something horrifically wrong, but the machine was used on him, and his mind was broken and he was ended up put into a coma. And then when he comes out of it, he's completely different. Or the investigation into how humanely are prisoners treated, both in the 70s and in the future. What is the ultimate treatment of prisoners and how do we reform them? Because obviously it's not with some sort of machine that changes their mind, because it causes so much damage to this guy. It's almost like he's gone through a lobotomy. How Jo kind of wrestles with that and looks after this man, develops on her own, is really well done in this serial. You even start to see the Jo and the Master's relationship starting to buddy a little bit, which I like, because I think they have some of the funnest companion-master relationship of all time. I think they're great. And speaking of companion-master relationship, one of the other unexpected joys of this serial was Captain Yates and the Master. For some reason, Roger Delgado just has intense chemistry with whoever he's acting across from, and whenever he's in the scene with Yates, he's just absolutely insane. It's like, you're sitting there and you're watching it and you're like, what are they doing behind the scenes? Jesus Christ, the chemistry they've got is palpable. It's so much fun to watch, and I would honestly recommend this serial just for those scenes. Other fun highlights: the Brig gets to do his Brigadier-esque things, shenanigans. He dresses up as a milkman, or is it a post office? I can't remember. But he dresses up in disguise and he sneaks into the prison, and it's just chaotic. But on the whole, I think it's definitely got more positives to the serial than negatives, but I would say that it's perhaps in the middle of the season for me. The Claws of Axis. The third story in Season 8, The Claws of Axis, aired in 4 parts and marked a return to a more traditional alien invasion type story. Written by the new writing duo of Bob Baker and Dave Martin, it was directed by Michael Ferguson. The story balances high-concept sci-fi with more political satire, wrapped in a very fast-paced narrative. This type of story was very reminiscent of what Terrance Dicks and Barry Letts like to do throughout their run as showrunners or producers. The plot begins with a strange comet-like object entering the Earth's atmosphere. It turns out just to be a ship, which lands near the English coastline. Its occupants are the Axons, apparently benevolent aliens claiming to be stranded after a solar flare disaster. They offer humanity a miraculous substance called Axonite, promising that it can replicate any material, potentially solving global food shortages and energy problems overnight. Naturally, the government is intrigued. A civil servant named Chin is dispatched to secure Axonite for Britain alone, hoping to gain a strategic advantage, reflecting the real-world political climate of the early 1970s and the Cold War atmosphere. Meanwhile, Unit, the Doctor and Jo begin to investigate the ship and the strange events surrounding its arrival. Unbeknownst to them, the Axons are not as benevolent as they may seem. Their plan is to spread Axonite worldwide, using it to drain all energy from the planet. It's a classic bait-and-switch episode. Right in the middle of all, actually, is the Master. This time, he is captured by the Axons and seemingly forced into cooperations. Behind the scenes, this serial had its own share of difficulties, like possibly every other serial in Doctor Who. The original pitch was for a longer story for the Second Doctor era involving a skull-shaped spaceship and multiple alien factions. By the time it managed to get produced, the budget had been severely cut and was reduced to 4 parts. Harsh weather during filming added to the challenges, with Katie Manning reportedly suffering mild frostbite. The writers, particularly Bob Breaker, were also frustrated by the last-minute inclusion of the Master, who hadn't featured in the original draft but was required to maintain the arc of Season 8. Structurally, the Claws of Axis is quite fast-moving. The Axons appear as golden humanoids in one form and grotesquely tentacled creatures in the other. A classic examples of Doctor Who's ability to deliver more surreal imagery, even on a very tight budget. The interior of the Axon ship was filled with psychedelic visuals and organic textures, and it gives the serial a distinctive aesthetic. The Doctor is initially very suspicious of these Axons and pretends to cooperate. He even briefly considers accepting the Master's offer to escape Earth together in his TARDIS, seemingly abandoning the planet. But as we come to learn, this is part of a larger, more manipulative scheme. The Doctor ultimately turns the Axon's own technology against them, trapping them and the Master in a time loop using their own ship. As ever, the Master may or may not have escaped, and the story leaves that deliberately open-ended. The final scenes show the Doctor back on Earth with units safe and the threat neutralised for now. What makes the Claws of Axis particularly interesting is its more diverse mix of ideas, bringing to the forefront the idea of resource hoarding, international politics, and the dangers of trusting too readily into technological miracles. All of that wrapped in a more action-heavy story with eye-catching designs and one of the more surreal alien threats of the era, make it an interesting serial for a middle of the season.
My dear Mr. Chin, if I could leave, I would. If only to get away from people like you.
Doctor?
And your petty obsessions. England for the English, good heavens, man.
I have a duty to my country.
Not to the world.
Good morning.
The Claws of Axis is definitely, I think, up there, one of the top serials of this season, and a lot of it is due down to the aesthetics of it. It's so, I think they really take the fact that they're in colour now, even though they've been in colour for, this is the second season in colour, this is the first time they really take that fact that they're in colour and they just throw everything at it. You have golds and bright pinks and bright reds and blues and greens, and everything's sort of thrown at the audience to try to create that uneasy, that strange aspect, that alien aspect that does really, really well with this serial. And I think the colours and the set design really drive home, or help drive home, the alienness of the characters, the Axons. And even when you're thinking that they're helpful creatures, you're really just set on edge by this imagery and this colour, and it really does a good job of wrapping that all up. Otherwise, there is an American in this serial, which is fun because you don't often get an American playing an American properly in this serial. And the political commentary it makes on resource hoarding is actually quite significant, because especially Britain from the 70s and even before that were known for resource hoarding for their own people and letting other people suffer because of that kind of situation. And it really drives home that point that the British agent was not focused on trying to figure out if this was a threat or what strings attached this Axonite came with. It was just so intent of making sure that they were the only ones that were going to get it. It wasn't going to go to any other countries. They were the ones that were going to hold all the power. It's really, really interesting to see sort of how that develops, and you end up having these sort of three factions almost. You have the Doctor in unit, you have the British agent and his soldiers, and then you have, obviously, the Axons, and you have the Master in the middle of this kind of flitting between to and fro, trying to create chaos wherever he can. And I think this serial really drives home the point that the Master is quite pathetic, almost. He's quite inefficient. So he's tried twice now to destroy the world, and this is his third time, and he keeps failing miserably. His plans keep failing absolutely atrociously, and he keeps having to make last-minute dashes. But does that stop him? No, it does not. And it's just really, really funny to see him keeping doing the same things, keeping trying to vie for attention from the Doctor, and end up coming up short almost. Colony in space. Colony in Space marked a very different type of story for season 8. It was written by Malcolm Hulke and directed by Michael E. Bryant, and it was a 6-part serial, was the first to take the Third Doctor away from Earth since his exile began. More significantly, it was the first Qualler story to fully explore an alien planet setting, returning the show to its more heavy roots in heavy off-world science fiction. The premise is fairly straightforward, but layered with a lot of social commentary for the time. Time Lords, once again observing from the sidelines, send the Doctor and Jo to the planet Uraxius in the far future, using the TARDIS against the Doctor's will. Their mission is to investigate a threat linked to something known as the Doomsday Weapon. However, the Doctor is initially unaware of this purpose. When they arrive, they discover a struggling group of human colonists who are trying to make life on this barren, remote world. Their efforts are being undermined by mysterious attacks and sabotage. Almost immediately, Jo is sceptical about their surroundings, finding it very difficult to believe that they've travelled through time and space. The tension escalates with the arrival of the Interplanetary Mining Corporation, the IMC, whose representation claim legal rights to the planet. But the Doctor quickly realises that the IMC's methods are highly questionable. They've been using a robot disguised as a native monster to frighten the colonialists into leaving, an obvious metaphor for corporate exploitation and colonial greed. This serial also introduces us to the native Uraxians, an intelligent but secretive race who become caught in the conflict between the two warring factions of humans. While the colonialists and the IMC descend into open hostility, Jo is captured by the Uraxians, and the Doctor finds himself trying to prevent both a civil war and an interspecies conflict. The situation becomes even more heavy and complicated with the arrival of an adjudicator from Earth, who was originally sent to resolve the conflict. However, this adjudicator is revealed to be the Master in disguise. Once again, Delgado's character manipulates both sides for his own ends, using his authority to side with IMC and push forward his real objective, gaining control of the ancient Doomsday Weapon hidden beneath the surface of the planet. The Master's plan is very typical for his character in this season. He wants to use the weapon to gain control over the galaxy, believing its destructive power will give him the leverage he needs. His attempts to persuade the Doctor to join him fail, and he tries to appeal to this shared heritage as a fellow Time Lord and offering the promise of absolute power. True to form, the Doctor refuses. Instead, he allies with the Uraxians, who are also deeply concerned about the weapons. The final act sees a showdown in the ancient underground city where the Doctor convinces the Uraxian elders to destroy the Doomsday Weapon to prevent anyone from using it. In the end, the Master escapes once more and the real adjudicator arrives and the IMC is removed from the planet. The colonialists, however, remain with some hope of building a future. The Doctor and Jo return to Earth, their memories intact, though the Brigadier is predictably sceptical of their off-world adventure. What sets Colony in Space apart is its far slower pace and more deliberate focus on moral themes. Hulke, a writer known for embedding political commentary in his work, tackles ideas of corporate imperialism, indigenous rights, and the misuse of power. It's less action-driven than other stories of this season, but offers a more philosophical take on the Doctor's role within the universe.
Talking as if we'd never been away.
As far as he's concerned, we haven't. The TARDIS returned to Earth just a few seconds after it left.
What are you two talking about?
Don't try and explain, Joe. He'd never understand.
While Hulke was trying to discuss colonialism and imperialism, and especially corporate colonialism, which was something that was relatively new compared to actual colonialism, it does miss a bit, because obviously the colonialists, the ones with their colony that are trying to build a life that the IMC... So the ones that the IMC are actively trying to drive out are also actively trying to drive out the indigenous population in the planet. And I think that sort of part of the story isn't really discussed all that much, and sort of muddies, I think, the point that Hulke was going for, that corporate colonialism is the worst type of colonialism, which we know is not true, or they're both equally bad. So it's a very... I think, it's fun that we're off-world again, that Joe's getting to see this alien planet for the first time. I think it's quite misguided in this part, and I think that's why I always struggle with this serial, because it just doesn't line up, I think, the way it probably should. And as a result, I think this is probably the weakest of the serials. It doesn't benefit. I think it's quite a jarring tone shift to suddenly go from something that we're all familiar with to suddenly this middle of nowhere colonial outcrop, and I think it if we're trying to go for jarring, it works really well, but particularly here I think it just doesn't really work in terms of the theme for the rest of the season. I think it's probably the odd one out in many ways, but the main one being in tone. The Demons. The Demons concluded season 8 with a blend of folklore, horror and science fiction, and has quickly become a fan favourite. Written by Barry Letts and Robert Sloman under the shared pseudonym of Guy Leopold, it was directed by Christopher Barry, and the 5-part serial was envisioned as the season's dramatic finale, and it delivers on that ambition with a very different atmosphere from the rest of the season. It's set in a sleepy English village of Devil's End and follows an archaeological dig at a nearby burial mound, which some believe is cursed. Miss Hawthorne, a local white witch, tries to warn people against opening it, convinced that something deeply terrible will be unleashed. When the tomb is opened during a live television broadcast, a powerful force is released. The ground shakes and the Doctor, who has been watching on the telly, races to the scene with Joe. That force is Azal, an ancient alien from a race called the Demons. He's been mistaken for a devil throughout human history, and his ship lies buried beneath the mound. Azal's awakening coincides with the reappearance of the Master, who's now posing as the local vicar and performing dark rituals in the church crypt to summon the alien and claim its power for himself. The setting plays heavily into the popular genre, especially at the time, of folk horror, with pagan symbolism, Morris dancing and countryside superstition all woven into the plot. Unlike most of the folk horror of the time, however, The Demons frames supernatural elements through a science fiction lens. These aren't literal demons, of course, but ancient beings with advanced technology long misunderstood by human beings. Production-wise, this serial was filmed largely on location in Aldbourne, a real English village, giving it a more grounded and believable setting. This sense of place is strong, and the cast and crew lived locally during the filming, which reportedly created a strong familiar and family-like atmosphere during it. This story also marks quite a big milestone. Its final episode was the 300th episode of Doctor Who overall. There are some fun production footnotes as well. The explosion of the unit helicopter was from stock footage taken from a recent James Bond film, From Russia with Love, and the story avoided direct references to God or Christianity due to blasphemy laws that were still in place in England at the time. Despite that, its themes of sacrifice, temptation or morality are very, very heavy throughout this story. Narratively, the story builds to a classic confrontation. The Master intends to use Azal to gain ultimate power. However, Azal decides that the Doctor is the more worthy recipient and instead offers him the power, but the Doctor refuses, arguing that such power is dangerous in any hands. Jo then offers to sacrifice herself to save the Doctor's life, and Azal's overwhelmed by this concept of selflessness, a contradiction that he can't quite process, and is ultimately destroyed. The final scenes are unusually celebratory for a Doctor Who episode, but quite often cuts off right when kind of people are starting to celebrate and are kind of accepting what's happened. The Doctor normally slugs away, and that's the end of the story from our point of view. But we actually get to see the celebrations of the defeat of the villain of the piece, and the Master is eventually captured, the village is saved, and the unit team join the locals around the Maple, while the Brigadier and Yates slip off for a quiet pint together. It's a very rare moment of peace and triumph for a season that has either been quite up and down with high stakes and recurring threats.
Fancy a dance, Brigadier?
It's kind of you, Captain Yates. I'd rather have a pint.
You like Joe, there is magic in the world after all.
One thing that is significant for me, and anybody that knows anything about me will know this, is that folk horror is one of my favourite genres of horror ever. I think it's so rich and full of interesting concepts and how different people approach the idea of folk horror really, really excites me. And this serial is no different. I think Doctor Who is perhaps unlikely, but is very well placed to tell a folk horror story due to its kind of framing, its sort of idea around it. Something that's significant to me in this serial is quite often the Doctor gets it wrong. Quite often, like for example, at in the first episode, the Doctor knocks himself into a coma, which he can't even get out of for a couple of hours. So Jo has to take kind of centre stage in investigating what's going on, and it's Jo's relationship with the Doctor that ends up saving the day, because it's Jo who their friendship and their relationship over the course of the season has grown so deep and developed so quickly that by the end Jo is, without even thinking about it, ready to die to save the Doctor, because she knows how important he is to her and the rest of the world. And I think that's a really, really fun, or maybe not fun, but really fascinating character arc for them, especially throughout this season. Another thing about the Doctor not being fantastic is that because it's set in this folk horror sort of theme, there is an idea that the Doctor's scientific reasoning doesn't always help him. For example, Miss Hawthorne often manages to triumph over the Doctor in terms of ability and outcome, and that sort of thing rarely happens in the Doctor Who serial, where it seems like magic is winning out over science in that sort of serial. And that is another reason why I think it's such an interesting serial, because it takes what you're expecting from Doctor Who and it really just turns it on top of the head while looking at folk horror through that sci-fi lens. And all in all, I think it's I think I could probably do a video essay only on folk horror and Doctor Who, because there are so many examples of folk horror throughout the series. For example, there's 4th Doctor serials, there's 5th Doctor serials, there's 11th Doctor serials. They just really just hit the nail on the head with how folk horror is depicted and different things and how different writers come across it and stuff like that. And also, there's just so many great character moments in this between Brigadier and Yates and Benton, Yates and Benton and Jo, the Doctor and literally everything else. Osgood, for example, is a character that's introduced as this sort of bumbling scientist man, and he's so funny, and you see him a couple of times crop up again in a couple of serials, but this is really where he gets more of a central stage. And I don't know, it's just, I think it's one of the best serials of Doctor Who, classic Doctor Who at all. I think it's one of my favourites for sure. It's just perfectly paced, perfectly well executed. The atmosphere is done really, really well. All in all, I just think it's a fantastic serial. And if you're looking for one to watch out of this season, I'd watch The Demons, because it's probably the best for sure. So season 8 stands out as a turning point for Doctor Who. It not only introduced the key characters, established the Master as a lasting antagonist, but it also saw Letts and Dix reshape the tone of the series into something more dramatic, confident, character-driven, and more thematically rich, more pointed in its politics. Whether rooted in alien conspiracies, dystopian futures, or ancient legends, each serial contributed to the evolving identity of the show during the 1970s and stands out as one of the more fun and significant seasons of classic Who. All in all, a good season. And that's season 8 of Doctor Who. From whether you're revisiting these stories or discovering them for the first time, it's a very, very fun and fascinating snapshot of a show that's constantly evolving. And definitely this season in particular, it's taking a lot of creative risks, pushing boundaries and kind of playing with what Doctor could be, especially now that it was in colour. And that has ultimately resulted in a net positive for the show, because we wouldn't have the Master otherwise. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to hit a like, subscribe, and let me know what Master serial is your favourite Master episode, or what even your favourite serial is from this season. I am just hopping in at the end here to mention that it has been a year since I did the season 7 video, and I have recorded this video 4 times over the past year, and unfortunately it's just not gotten made. I've not had time to edit, I've had time to write, I've had time to watch and listen and read Doctor Who stuff, but I just haven't had time to do anything else. I'm coming into my final year of my PhD, which is taking more and more time from me, and I was injured for a good while. The last 3 months I've been badly injured, so all in all, I'm hoping to try and get things out, but I keep saying that and it keeps not happening, so I'm just hoping. So please stick around if you enjoy these. I know irregularity isn't the best or most productive thing for a YouTube channel, but I will eventually get back around to it. I'm not going to abandon you all in the middle of season 8. The next one I'm probably going to film is a Expanded Universe video, focusing on all the stories before Doctor Who is set. So everything with the Doctor leaving Gallifrey, Susan, and coming up to the Unearthly Child. Unearthly Child. And then, who knows? Probably season 9, but you know. Anyway, thank you for watching, and bye! See you next time.